for every Thank you so much to everyone for joining us. Um, my name is Isabel. I'm an editor over at Mold with Lenny. And we are gathering here today as a part of our ongoing Earthseed series, which is celebrating Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower. The book, if you've been following along, begins in 2024 and sort of unfolds from there. So we wanted to honor that with this book club and this reading. So across the series, we've been inviting land workers, artists, designers, and thinkers to sort of share with how Parable of the Sower as a text influenced their practice and their ideas towards understanding our world and the possibilities offered by the futures in it. Um, and so today we'll be led in conversation by our contributor, Shakara Tyler. Shakara is a returning generation farmer, educator, and organizer. She explores participatory and decolonial research methodologies and community-centered pedagogies in the food justice, food sovereignty, and environmental justice movements. And her work she's worked within organizations such as the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, Detroit People's Food Co-op, the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund, and the Black Dirt Farm Collective. So we're really excited to have Shakara joining with us and sharing about her practice and Parable of the Sower's influence on that. So I'll give up the floor to Shakara, who can maybe introduce yourself a little bit more.
Thanks, Isabel. Peace, everyone. Happy to be here with you all. And it's such an honor, and I'm really humbled to be sharing the space and to be facilitating this discussion. Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents are like two of my most favorite books. I am in love with Octavia Butler. Um, I think she is a prophet that left us too soon. And I've learned a lot from her work, and it was actually my launch into Black sci-fi and Afrofuturist literature that I really love to engage in, not just like as recreational reading, but like really um, literature that teaches me a lot about the work that I'm doing and how I'm doing it, especially as it relates to land and food and organizing and all the things that I hope to get into today. So a little bit more about myself. I just recently started as the new co-executive director at the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network. So we are a food sovereignty organization, a Black-led food sovereignty organization. Um, and we are working towards we facilitate the self-reliance of Black Detroiters, through food and land so that we're less dependent on the systems that exploit and extract from our communities. I'm also a co-founder of the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund, which is a coalition of 3 urban ag organizations in the city of Detroit. And we see ourselves as the medium that is helping Black growers in the city rebuild intergenerational wealth through land ownership and infrastructure development and many, many other things. I'm also a member of the Black Dirt Farm Collective, which in practice is a cooperative of Black agrarian organizers, educators, researchers, policy advocates, meeting facilitators, and we identify as like people of the land that are facilitating Black people's return to the land. And we've coined the term Afroecology as a praxis or like a specific methodology around what that looks like, given Black people's enormous trauma with land, and how it's been used as a weapon against us, and how we can shift or transform or even alchemize land as a weapon into like land as power and land as healing, and just shifting it into a more like positive mindset. Um, I'm also a mother, which is a huge part of why I do this work. I actually started growing my own food when I became a mother at 19. So my daughter here on the left here, we were harvesting carrots from our farm. We were in a beginning farmer training program. We rented a quarter acre of land where we were living at the time. And it was the most magical experience ever. And I mean, I actually continue to do this work mainly for my children and future generations that they'll birth. Because I believe that it's about ensuring that there's a planet here for them that's not only livable, but a planet that will continue to hold them and love them as the planet has done for us in these times. So I think she was in this picture, she was about maybe 8, and now she's 16. And I also have many other children. I have 2 others that I've birthed after her. And it's a huge joy for me to be growing food and just be in the land space with them and engaging their curiosities and facilitating their understanding of how we are deeply connected to the land. It's not something separate from us, but it's something very much a part of us, which is very different from like a Western philosophy, like we're separate from the land. We extract natural resources, as the saying goes, so that we can survive. Um, and so a huge part of our work is I don't want to say decolonizing, but undoing that mindset so that people can actually see themselves as part of the environment, as part of nature, and not something separate, or like a domineering force over nature, which is highly oppressive. Um, yeah, so I ultimately see like environmental justice, food sovereignty, climate justice, all of these intersecting movements as my commitments to bring forth abolition and decolonization. And to be brief, I'll define abolition as the affirmation of Black life in a very anti-Black system, and decolonization as the insistence on Indigenous sovereignty and futurity. And so the land back movement is very, very key in my work. I do a lot of Black and Indigenous solidarity work here in Detroit. And also on the Eastern Seaboard. I'm from Philadelphia, and so I work very closely with organizations in Philly and the Maryland area. Um, and yeah, I don't see how we can do this work without being very clear that land has to be returned to Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, and also giving reparations to Black folks that have literally built the empire that we all benefit from today. So that's my charge that I wake up to every day, and I'm not gonna lie, it's hella stressful, but it's also hella joyful. And that's why I wrote this piece around like utopias and dystopias, because it's like this delicate balance and navigating this liminal space of like grief and joy and love and hate, maybe. But just like what we perceive as like peace and all that is well and divine, if you know what I mean. And then on the other hand, war and all that we are fighting against. And sometimes those things are like deeply intertwined more than we think. And I'm going to get a little into that. So we can go to the next slide. So I've been doing this work for about 10 years, or no, sorry, over 10 years. About my daughter is 16, so I was at 14 years. And I've seen how cooperation, not necessarily collaboration, but cooperation is so important. And it's probably one of the undervalued things that drives the work. And when I read Parable of the Sower years ago, like actually when I was in grad school. I got my PhD from Michigan State, and I was wanting to read things that weren't like academic literature. And so I got into reading sci-fi. And I read Parable of the Sower, and it blew my mind. And I really had no idea that writing could be that illustrious and that like inspiring, at least sci-fi writing, so to say. And a huge theme that I picked up on in that at that time reading the book, even before I started doing like cooperative development within a Black agrarian focus, was cooperation. And I really love how she says that civilization is to groups what intelligence is to individuals. And civilization provides ways of combining the information, experience, and creativity of the many to achieve ongoing group adaptability. And so what Butler offers in this conjuring of community of Acorn and the Earthseed religion in the book is not the creation of a mythical utopia, but instead like a homage to the central way that cooperative action can play in not just surviving, but thriving. And like the togetherness that's involved in that surviving and thriving. And notably, Earthseed's belief system encourages the pursuit of social cooperation and collective action. Like there are like story after story, many examples unfold throughout the book of how no one would have breath in their bodies if they weren't working together, if they weren't cooperating. And I think that's a really big lesson for us in these times of crises, because many Western and white supremacist thinking or thoughts would tell you that we have to compete in order to survive. So for instance, this theory around evolution or Darwinism, right? Like Darwin's theory of evolution, that is held as like this pinnacle theory of biology and political ecology, even and science more broadly, um, that many people hold very dear as like this quintessential understanding of how the world works. To me, it's the biggest lie that we've been told throughout history, or one of them. And yeah, I just don't in my gut and in my lived experience as a Black woman, a cis identified Black woman living in a very like emerging fascist system, um, there is no way that I could compete with people that I'm in community with, and then even people that I'm not in community with, to survive. Like we have to be cooperating with one another. So in the novel, the intentional spiritual underpinnings of Acorn, as well as the leadership, um, reminds me of like the history of Black agrarian cooperatives that started as like mutual aid societies. And I'm not sure if anyone has read Collective Courage, The History of African American Economic Thought and Practice by Jessica Gordon Nimhard. She is, again, another prophet who did 20 plus years of research on Black cooperatives throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, or the 18th through 20th centuries. And she really unfolds the history in very detailed ways that talks about like how our cooperatives came to be, that started back in and during enslavement when we were buying each other out of enslavement just with pennies in our pockets, right? Um, and so the acorn and earthseed religion that Butler outlines in Parable of the Sower is like deeply translatable to the ideas that Jessica Gordon Nimhart talks about in her book, Collective Courage. So I encourage you to look up the book if you haven't. Um, and I have to, and I forgot to talk about this in the earlier slide, but women are running the motherfucking world always. And it's no surprise that women are like the majority of cooperators, like within formal cooperative institutions. And we see that Acorn was led by a woman, Lauren. And like to me, these are like not coincidences, because for me, like cooperation is a very like feminine energy. No shade to the masculine, no shade to men. I love men. I'm very much a masculine energy too. Like I believe that everyone has both. But in terms of like how my worldview is grounded in this understanding of like cooperation and the solidarity economy and like leading with your heart, like centering love as part of the work. is very much a nurturing practice that retreats to like a feminine energy that anyone can take on. You don't have to have a uterus to exhibit feminine energy, right? And so I just want to uplift how mutual aid societies historically within the Black agrarian cooperative context and even Acorn and the Earthseed religion and cooperatives today are led very unapologetically by women, given like the ethic around like we have to be working together in order to ensure that everyone is good, essentially. So let's go to the next slide. Another, yes, I want to further emphasize cooperation over competition. So Lauren tells in the novel, in the book, Lauren tells a skeptical newcomer to Acorn, when you're well enough, work with us. Everyone works here, kids and adults. You'll help in the fields, help with the animals, help maintain the school and its grounds, help do some building. Building homes is a communal effort. And I really love this quote because it sometimes I love to reside in like this I love thinking about what pre-colonial societies may have looked like, right? And I know we have these romanticized ideas like villages that are like organized by various huts or like individual residences that are close together, and then everyone is sharing water and food and all these things, right? um and I really do believe that like those kinds of spaces like the village practice, where everyone is helping everyone else build their homes, cook food, go fetch water, and bring it back to the community. Like all of these basic things that are required to exist is done communally, because how else would it be done? Like I believe it's like scientifically impossible for people to coexist, and even I believe it's impossible for people to coexist if they're not cooperating with one another. So I'll go back to the book. So Lauren continues with this newcomer on page 83. She's describing that the newcomer should decide, if they decide to join the community, he will receive a share of the profits and a decision-making role. And this passage illuminates that Acorn's community is underpinned by cooperative economics. So an example that I'll lift up in this regard is the organization that I work with, the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network, just recently birthed the Detroit People's Food Co-op, which is the city's only Black-owned community grocery store. And so it's of course it's a Black-led community grocery store, not Black-owned, because it is a member owner legal structure where people pay a $200 lifetime membership fee to become a member owner, and they have various decision-making power in regards to what the store puts on the shelves, how we price things, so on and so on. Electing the board of directors, that's the governance structure of the community-owned grocery. And it's a big game changer, because Detroit, as many people know, is an example of food apartheid and not a food desert. We don't say food deserts. That's a very um academically imposed term on our communities. We say food apartheid because, well, for many reasons, but in brief here, I'll say that food apartheid doesn't let someone off the hook for why things are the way they are. Like people not having access to fresh, affordable, healthy food is not a coincidence. The system was designed that way. So the food system isn't broken. It's working exactly the way it was designed. And the only way that we're going to beat the system at its own game is cooperating with one another, pulling our resources together, and building an institution that serves everyone and not just like a few individuals that have the wealth to make it work. And so that's the like undergirding orientation around the Detroit People's Food Co-op and other similar Black cooperative institutions that are cropping up all around the country, whether they're grocery oriented or agricultural production oriented or education or housing oriented. Like people are finally understanding that there is no way out if we're not going through together. So that means incorporating formal legal institutions as legal cooperatives so that the wealth is shared, right? And decision-making is shared. And so we see this in Acorn, the way community members pool their labor, knowledge, resources, and tools to meet the common needs, including housing, education, medical, and nutritional needs as a group, as a whole. Let's go to the next slide. Food, land, and togetherness is really like an important theme in the book because central to the community's economic independence and the social cohesion that undergirds Acorn is based on land. Like Lauren's husband, I think I call him Bancoli. Someone please check me if the pronunciation is wrong. But the land is owned free and clear, right, by Bancoli, and the land gives community members a sense of place, purpose, and commitment. And upon first arriving to the land, a founding member of Acorn expresses her desire to settle by proclaiming, I want to build something. I never got the chance to build anything. And so the land, not as like this barren space, as like settler colonialism try to mix it, but the land as this like slate of possibilities and opportunities for collaboration provides like a launching pad for people to begin to create something really beautiful together. So what the land allows the group to do is build community self-determination. And on page 85, Lauren says, I'm content here. The land is yours. The community is ours. With our work and with Earthseed to guide us, we're building something good here. It will grow and spread. We'll see that it does, but for now, nothing in any of those towns is ours. And also on the land, in terms of the togetherness, Lauren facilitated gatherings, right? And so these were weddings, funerals, welcomings, holiday celebrations, but more importantly, they were problem-solving sessions that provided people to have dialogue with one another around like, okay, this is what I'm experiencing. What are we going to do about this? Let's come up with some solutions where we could like brainstorm together and come up with something that works for everyone. And so these are really important times for like planning and healing, as Butler says, learning, creating times of focus and reshaping ourselves. And so a lot of the work that I engage in has taught me that this work is about self-transformation, and we can't, what's that saying? Like you can't transform the world if you're not transforming yourself. And so transformation is like an inside out process. And the food, land, and like gathering on land and growing food and like just developing shared systems cooperatively has been for me the most transformative thing that I've engaged in ever in my life. And I've given birth to 3 children. So I like if you just opposing childbirth and like gathering with people on land is some of the most magical experiences of my life. Let's go to slide 4 or go to the next slide. Ancestral remembrance and memories. And this is really important because Western society doesn't really know what to do with spirituality, right? Like it's mostly it's about religion. And Earthseed, the Earthseed religion, as it states in the book, is more of a spiritual praxis and process, as I interpret it. And I really love how like Lauren talks about we remember the ancestors, they live within us, you know, we keep them alive by our practices. And so this really reflects the idea of Sankofa. And I don't know if people are familiar with the idea of Sankofa, which is a part of the Adinkra symbology of the Akan people of Ghana and West Africa. Sankofa means to go back and fetch it. It's the bird the swan that has its neck turned towards its back while it's walking forward with the egg in its mouth. And so basically it's saying you don't know where you're going until you know where you came from. And it's a huge symbol within our culture, and it represents the importance of like the ancestors and like remembering where we have come from, remembering the shoulders that we stand on. We stand on the shoulders of giants, as we say. And it's because of them that we're able to do this work. And Butler on page 328 says the community of Acorn is born out of remembrance for the dead. Shortly after arriving to Benkolli's land, Lauren writes, today we remembered the friends and the family members we've lost. We spoke our individual memories and quoted Bible passages, Earthseed verses, and bits of songs and poems that were favorites of the living or the dead. And um, when I read that, it sort of reminded me of my experiences with farmers in Cuba and Puerto Rico, and these other like really beautiful places where people are just surviving because they have each other. Like when the system has completely divested from their communities and literally thrown them away, they're literally like so happy. They're not just like barely making it, but they have so much joy within themselves because they have each other. They're together. Um, and in these spaces, we would always start the day before we went out into the fields, whether it was like using the machete to cut down brush or go plant some seeds or harvest, I don't know, leafy greens for lunch. We would start with ceremony. So we would sing songs, we would play instruments, we would listen to the sounds of the birds and the wind blowing. And it was a way for us to connect to the spirit of the work, so honoring the spirit that's embedded in the soil and the trees and the worms and the bees even, right? Like this really ceremonial ethic around the work is extremely important that I saw reflected in the book as well. And we can go to the next slide. And so building upon my experiences in Latin America, Diálogo de Saberes, or Dialogue of Knowledges, has been a key theme in the book for me, and that relates to my experience because cooperation at Acorn is sustained by continuous and collective education of members. And this isn't like education that's very top down. Paulo Freire, if you're familiar with his work, Critical Pedagogy, talks about like the banking method of education where teachers think that they could just deposit information in the student's mind as like as if it was a bank, right? And that's very oppressive. It doesn't really work, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't facilitate empowerment within people. And so if you really want to talk about education as a liberatory tool, you approach education from a more horizontal perspective, right? So Diálogo de Saberes talks about like the horizontal knowledge exchange where the power relations aren't like hierarchical, but they're leveled. And so people are literally sharing skills and like physical supplies, whether it's seeds or shovels or whatever, as a way to be in solidarity with one another. And developing like this intimacy around like our stories and our cultures that our knowledges carry. Um, so Butler on page 34 says, once the members of the group have pulled their money and bought hand cart, seed, small livestock, hand tools, and other necessities, they were almost independent. Larkin offers, and then there's another quote, one of the most valuable things they traded with one another was knowledge. And so that's really, really, really important of like how we see knowledge as an asset in our communities, especially within like racialized communities and like low-income communities, even urban communities, like communities that are, have these code words, marginalized, underserved, socially disadvantaged, like all the terms that are imposed on us, right? But like we have so much power and so many assets that people don't even realize. And a lot of them are embedded in just like the knowledge that we have, whether it's like cultural knowledge or like knowledge in our bodies around like how to do something. You can't really articulate it, but your body can do it, you know what I mean? And so I really saw this reflected in Acorn and how they shared certain things with one another to build the world that they needed to survive. And I believe that's the end of my slides, and I'll pass it over. Oh, yeah, one more slide. Thank you. This is probably the most like famous quote from Octavia Butler. There's nothing new under the sun, but there are new suns. And this is like hanging up in my office and on my wall at home. And to me, it represents the possibilities that exist when we're doing liberation work, right? Especially with food and land at the center. Because as Malcolm X says, all revolution is based on land. And I really see the possibilities that exist for not just, Black people, but for everyone that identifies as a living organism, and not even just humans, but every living organism on this planet. There are so many possibilities to build towards liberation. And as I said in the article, I've learned how the migration has become the liberation. There's not like no one destination. Like we're finally going to arrive to this place of peace and no war, and everyone is getting along. And like there's, to me, that's a very highly romanticized and like lofty goal, because I've learned that even when we have certain wins as a movement, there'll be things that we'll have to figure out. There'll still be harm caused, like, for example, the lateral violence that happens within our movement spaces, just like personality differences or like the deep-seated trauma that we all experience as human beings. And then we don't really know how to process that trauma. And so we bring that into our movement spaces, and that is reflected in a number of ways. Like there'll always be things to work out and to overcome. And so the sons and the plural are the various worlds that we encounter as we're like migrating to other worlds, you know what I mean? And so um this statement is so prolific to me, because it's like she knew that um liberation is about possibilities, and it's about ensuring that people can imagine that another world is possible. And I'll end there.
Thank you so much for that incredible talk, Shakar. Your words have given, I'm sure, all of us so much food for thought and just introduced so much more depth to Parable of the Sower. I actually wanted to take some time here and just let people sort of process what you've just given us and offered us. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask about what Shakar has just shared? You can, chat, but you can also unmute yourself and ask yourself.
Shakara, thank you so much. That was so thoughtful and beautiful. And I was just fervently taking notes. And I am actually really excited that I'm glad that we recorded this so that we can revisit some of your um, learnings and thoughts. I wanted to return to this idea of land-based revolution and the ways that Lauren kind of maps out a, a vision for a kind of land-based renewal, and how that might continue to influence the way that your land-based work is kind of approached and visioned as well, collective visioning around that.
Yeah, there you go. There's so much I could say about that. Um,
You can also
so
like think about it and return to the question at another time. But I that was something that I was deeply moved by when your talk.
mhm. Um So, Lauren, when she is creating this community and, opening it up to people and developing all the systems and protocols for how they relate to one another, and not just her, but like doing it collectively with the people. Um, she talks about how the land is so central to that. It's our my interpretation of her words is like the land is the womb that is birthing our like new way of being with one another. Um, and it's also obviously a way to provide nourishment, you know what I mean? Like the way she carried, what was it, the acorn flower and seeds with her to this new space as a way to remember the land that she came from and like the stories and memories that made her who she is, and also taking those pieces of that land to this new land as a way to regenerate something adjacent, like something new and beautiful, but also very something old and like nostalgic at the same time. You know what I mean? Like to me, it's always like this balance of like being on this migration of like grief and celebration and working out conflict and like just like the struggle. Like Angela Davis says, like knowledge is built through struggle. And so like that the struggling on through and with land is what I saw in the acorn narrative. Um, which is really beautiful to me because it's like, what else are we going to do? Like, but to me, there are no other options but to struggle on through and with land, because that's the foundation of like built like giving birth to people that will live on the land and like growing the food and building the infrastructure. And so like using land as this like rebirth or communing with the land in this process of rebirth is what I like saw in the narrative, which is reflective of my experience as a food and land organizer. Um, does that answer your question? No? Okay.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any other questions they'd like to pose, or we'll also have more discussion in the next 10 minutes or so, if anyone wants. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead. Thank you again, Shakara, for that. I feel like, right now, especially for the chapters that we've read, if you've been following along with the Mold Book Club, we just read chapters 14 through 20. And for those of you who have been following along or are just joining because you wanted to jump in the talk, I'll give a quick summary and overview of what's been happening. So, I feel like this really relates to everything that Shakara has been speaking about, even though Shakara also gets into the more of the formulation of Acorn as we go throughout the book. But here we kind of start in crisis. Lauren's theories around Earthseed are put to the test because her commune is attacked and they undergo a really traumatic experience. And she flees and she is able to link up with two other commune members who have sort of also been able to make their way out, but they're just sort of reeling and grieving the loss of their community. And they start to hit the road and they start migrating. And I think, like Shakara mentioned about how liberation is in the migration, we kind of see that start to unfold. They start to trust each other and sort of figure out what their new lives are going to look like together on this journey. And so they're traveling north, and then they start to pick up other people along the road. They're walking along the freeway that go north. And they sort of also, you also start to see Lauren begin to share what Earthseed is with the people as they walk. I don't know about you, but for me, I feel like walking and talking sort of always facilitates these sort of more philosophical, metaphysical sort of conversations. And so they start talking about Earthseed, and you start to see Lauren sketch out what the community looks like, and you start to see not only that, but also how people start to buy into that. So that's what chapters 14 through 20 are. I've included this quote from chapter 14, where she says, "Everyone who's surviving out here knows things I need to know." I said, "I'll watch them. I'll listen to them. I'll learn from them. If I don't, I'll be killed. And like I said, I intend to survive." So, like Shakara says about, and had said earlier about in cooperative terms, like there's this strong understanding from the very beginning that Lauren, despite being a really independent person, understands that she can't do it alone. Which is also sort of outlined in this Earthseed quote: "Embrace diversity, unite or be divided, robbed, ruled, killed by those who see you as prey. Embrace diversity or be destroyed." And I think that, you know, for a lot of us who also work with land and gardening, you understand that it's important to have diversity in your gardens and in our food production system. So the question I sort of wanted to pose to all of us that are gathered here today is, first, how do we see Lauren's seed community under conditions of crisis? If you've been reading along, I'd love to know what sort of things you see her kind of do in building out what she thinks her vision of the future community looks like. Mhm. Feel free to chat or enter your words in the chat or speak up here.
I think one of the most potent ways that we see Lauren seed community is that she was like prepared, like she was kind of visioning from the very first pages of the book a kind of alternate future that she wanted to participate in, and that she understood was almost like a fugitive vision that didn't fit in with like what her father, family, or like pre-existing community approved of or could even understand as an option for a future. And so I feel like that visioning that she did in almost like a fugitive state was like helped her prepare, and also like to Shakara's point, like bring actual physical seeds with her as she fled, and helped her navigate with her chosen family how to actually leave. I forgot the name of the community, but like leave the city basically.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. And I think that also, like, you kind of see her, like another part, she talks kind of about the importance of kindness. And I think that, you know, it seems really basic and it's something you learn in the first grade or whatever, but she talks about how kindness is a way to midwife change, and it makes it easier to facilitate change. And it's really true in how she um extends her community and how she chooses. Like, I feel like she doesn't have, like, she has conflict with the people she's around because they're like, why would you kill that person? Like, you like did all of this. And then she is like, well, like, this is like my I have like these new rules of the road. But you also see that she has a deep kindness because she's defending people who are not able to defend themselves as well. Like, she brings in people who are more vulnerable to the road, like Natividad and Travis, who are young parents who are a mixed couple, which is also something that is targeted. So it's this kind of she has her own code, but that doesn't mean it's without the empathy and the softness and the interpersonal tenderness that she envisions in the future as well. Okay, next question and is what are some strategies for community building that we can learn from Parable the Sower as we mediate our own crises? Maybe we can, I feel like Shakara has sort of outlined this a bit in the talk, but I was wondering if there are any specific strategies that you see coming up again and again in your own work with organizing Shakara.
Yeah, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Yeah, emphasis, I can't overemphasize the importance of like the interpersonal, intrapersonal components. And so like a huge part of her seating community to me is like the gatherings that she insists everyone participates in so that, you know, everyone can be together and figure things out and, you know, weigh in, give their input. Like it's a really sacred process around like storytelling and like sharing kinetic energy of sorts, you know, like being in the same space with people. Um, I think is like a really undervalued kind of tactic in building community. Like we just assume that we just being together is being together, and sometimes it's more than that. So the gatherings is like problem solving sessions and like healing spaces really appeal to me. And it's become really critical because sometimes there's an overemphasis on like fundraising. You know, we got to get these coins so that we can pay for all the things. But you could have a multi-million-dollar budget, but there's no trust between the people doing the work, right? And as Adrienne Marie Brown says, like moving at the speed of trust is what is going to produce transformation. Like I personally don't like to work with anyone that I don't trust or I'm not actively building trust with. And so like strategies for community building, like just to be really simple, and it might sound really cliche, but it's like building trust, actively practicing the skills that we need to coexist together. And so that's like building trust. And when you do that by being in the same spaces, working on projects with people, sharing, hopefully reciprocating, resource exchanges, and also ceremony. So to go back to like the ceremonial ethic, and there's a reason why a huge part, like if you read historical literature, certain parts of historical literature, um, whether it doesn't matter which culture it comes from, there is a huge emphasis on um like honoring the dead or like doing ceremony as a way to acknowledge the spirits of all living things, right? And again, that's a very like often avoided or misunderstood or like forgotten way of being in the world. Like we're just acknowledging the things that we can't see around us, right? And knowing that our ancestors are in the space, but we can't see them, and still they're very important to this space. So, you know, for that reason, we have an ancestral altar set up in our office where we give daily offerings to, because it's a way for us to pull upon the ancestral power that you might can't see, but if you are attentive enough, if you are attentive enough in your body, you can feel it. Um, you know, we pour libations, and this is the practice, what some people may call like pouring out a little liquor in the ground to those that aren't with us, right? Like this, and this is a strategy that everyone practices in our community, like, you know, people in the movement, then also people not in the movement. You know, you'll see people on corners congregating, before they drink from the beer bottle, they're pouring out liquor on the ground. You know what I mean? And then even in a different setting, you know, we pour out water in a plant as a way to call out our ancestors' names and acknowledge their presence in the room. And I really appreciated Lauren like illuminating, paying homage to those that came before us. And again, like the small things have become big things out in there.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Did anyone else have anything to say? I think we're winding down on time here, so I just wanted to give some space in case anyone else wanted to respond to that question. Cool.
I just want to echo Shakara's earlier comment that, you know, Octavia is a sort of prophet for our times. And I just appreciate Shakara and Isabel for holding space for us to really sit with the work as a text for thinking through our current moment. And also on this kind of day of liminal ancestral energy, where in many cultures, this kind of moment of harvest and a time where we're preparing the fields to be fallow and to regenerate is also a bridging moment for us to be in communion with our ancestors. So thank you to both of you for holding space for that.
Thank you. Yeah, so I just wanted to also thank you all for being here with us today and spending time. I feel like I could sit forever and have so many questions to learn more about Shakara's practice. Like I was like, I have so much more to talk to you about. But I really appreciate you taking the time and spending the afternoon with us. I hope that everyone else who's joined us for this book club can also take away some of these liberating ideologies and lessons from this as well. We will be updating our Instagram with future book club events, and we have one more piece in the series that should be coming out next week. So follow along there to keep up with our Octavia readings. But in the meantime, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. This recording will be put up onto our website, so you can also revisit the conversation again or share with your friends and loved ones.
I also just wanted to bring up Miriam's comment in the chat, which I can read out loud on behalf of them because they're 4 a.m. in Australia's. These combos about cooperation over competition and the systems working against us, diluting food apathy with placeholder words. It brings me back to Ismatu's piece. Quote, "You've been traumatized into hating reading and it makes you easier to oppress," close quote. And there's a link to a Substack piece around that.
Right. Yeah, and also Linny also posted some links to some of the readings that Shakara mentioned in the chat as well. So make sure to check those out. Cool. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good Halloween and a good rest of your week.